everybody, and welcome back to Anis Vitre for a very special video celebrating 10,000 subscribers. First off, I want to say welcome to the channel. I'm so glad to have you here, and I'm really excited to dive into these questions. To celebrate, I thought that we could do a little bit of a Q&A because a lot of my videos on this channel are more impersonal. They're more about The Witcher than they are about me, but I actually really love talking about my creative process and also myself, and it's very flattering to have these questions asked of me. So thank you to all who submitted questions, and if I didn't get around to answering yours, I'm sorry. If you do have more questions that I didn't get around to answering, feel free to ask them again in the comments of this video, and I'll try to answer some after this video goes live. This video will probably be split into sections based on the topic of the question. And the first section is all about me. Niwa. If you don't know me yet, I don't know how you stumbled across this video, but hello, I'm glad you're still watching. My name is Niwa, I use they, them pronouns, and I have a channel all about The Witcher. But I haven't really introduced myself really deeply on this channel yet, so I'm glad to answer some questions about myself. The first question is, what did you study at your university, and do you have a master's degree or just a bachelor's? So I have a bachelor's degree. I have a bachelor's degree in design, but despite the academic flair of my videos, I do not actually have any degree in relevant to any of the topics that I talk about on this channel. I just kind of fell in love with the process of research, and whenever I make a kind of essay video where I'm doing a deep dive, I try to do a little bit of research into the topic so I'm not just spouting off my own opinion, but I can back it up with some sources. I'd actually love to go back to school at some point, but it's a lot of money and it's a lot of commitment, and I don't think I'm mentally ready to go back to school at this point in my life. But yeah, maybe when I reach my 30s, I'll go get my master's in something related to this channel. That would be really exciting. But yeah, I don't have a degree in anything like literature related or history related or Poland related, even though I talk about these subjects on my channel. While I was in university, I did minor in classical studies, which is the study of ancient Greece and Rome, and I am still really passionate about that, so I think that in a couple of my future videos, I want to talk about the classical perspective as it appears in Sapkowski's work, or as I see it in Sapkowski's work, because, you know, I don't really know if he intended it, but I just see these relationships, even though I don't know if they're intentional by the author. Do you have any hobbies apart from The Witcher? Yes, I do. I like to think of myself as a well-rounded person, even though, you know, I know The Witcher takes up a lot of my brain power, but I do really love baking, cooking. I love hiking in nature. I have a lot of houseplants that I love to take care of, and I also really like tasting coffee, tasting special coffees, and making them with my little espresso machine at home. I used to have a lot of more tactile hobbies when I was younger, like I used to sew, I used to crochet. I feel like a lot of the tactile hobbies are not really practical because you just start accumulating all of this fabric or all of this yarn, and then the storage gets out of hand. A lot of my hobbies, a lot of my art became digital because of that. I guess this is my hobby, video editing is my hobby, and being on camera is my hobby. Hi. But I would really love to get back into sewing, I think. I still have my sewing machine and all of my fabric and stuff. Well, I kind of wanted to make more costumes and stuff related to The Witcher, but my skills have also degraded since I stopped. So I think I need to relearn how to sew. I also really like coding small little websites, and I wanted to do something like that related to this channel, but I haven't really had the time to execute it yet. It's something that I learned how to do in school and something that I did a lot in the projects that we did there, but in the real world, not in school, typically the designer is not the one that is making the website. There's a developer for that. So my little knowledge of HTML and CSS is not really taking me anywhere professionally. However, I think that it's really cool, and I really like the movement of the web renaissance and also vintage websites. I think a lot of my passion for that comes out in my research for The Witcher, because there's a lot of old fan sites, and I kind of wanted to create a project where I emulate that style, but all of this is sort of it's not been done yet, so I'll just share more when that comes out, if it comes out. How did it happen that a girl from California got so fascinated about The Witcher and everything around it? So I kind of answered this question already in my video celebrating 10 years of The Witcher 3, but I'm happy to tell it again. So I got into The Witcher in, I think, the summer of 2017, so I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary, yay. I actually got into The Witcher by playing The Witcher 3, which of course came out in 2015. But the Blood and Wine DLC only came out in 2017, so I had picked it up then when there was a collector's edition. I think I bought it off of Steam for $30 on a summer sale. And I really fell in love with the world. I feel I had really only played games like Skyrim up until then, which, you know, Skyrim has a plot, it has characters, but They are more like the idea of characters rather than actual characters. Sorry. Not to diss Skyrim, it's one of my favorite games still. It's like my favorite cozy game, right? But I feel like for The Witcher, it felt like a much deeper world to me, and I was immediately captured by it. The characters are really deep, the storylines get pretty intense, and I would also say that The Witcher is a much more mature game than Skyrim is, and I got into Skyrim when I was like 11 and 12. So when I was about like 16, 17, being into The Witcher was like, it felt like I was maturing in a sense, and I found the world something that I could take like more seriously. Also, when I was more of a Skyrim fan, I was really into the lore of the Elder Scrolls. So if you don't know, there is writing outside of the games, mostly like written by Michael Kirkbride. But like the thing is with Skyrim is that lore doesn't really always appear in the game. I just, got into it because it's written online. But in The Witcher, I immediately sensed that like a lot of the lore and background writing actually appears more in the games, and it's more interactive and it's more present in your player experience. So that really enticed me about The Witcher 3 immediately. I think that in the beginning I was a little bit confused because of course The Witcher 3 is the last in a trilogy of games, and also it's based on the book series. So I was a little bit intimidated, like, oh, I haven't read the books, I haven't played the first two games, like, am I really going to enjoy this? But I felt like the more I played, the more accessible it became to me, and I just really got into it. So then I had completed the whole game. One funny quirk of my first playthrough, aside from romancing Triss, which I admit I did in my first playthrough. I'm sorry, guys. Aside from that, one other funny quirk is that I completed Hearts of Stone before I completed like the base game, because I had gotten into those quests, and then I realized that like I had the mark on my face, or my Geralt had the mark on his face, and I was like, I cannot travel to the Isle of Mist with this shit on my face. Siri's gonna think I'm fucking insane. So I actually completed the whole DLC of Hearts of Stone before going to the Isle of Mist, which even though I played on like super easy mode, I just play on just the story mode, it was still sort of like a challenge because I was not properly leveled for it. But I really just did not want Ciri to see Geralt with that demonic mark on his face. So after completing the main game and Hearts of Stone, then I went to Blood and Wine, and this is actually when I got back into the books. So a bit of a funny story here. I actually got into The Last Wish, which is the first book of the Witcher series, if you didn't know. I got into that. I started reading it alongside playing the base game, somewhere like early in the game. I think I was like in Velen when I started this, so early in the Witcher 3 storyline, just because I wanted a little bit more about like, who is Geralt of Rivia, and like what kind of choices does he typically make? Because I think that as someone who is used to playing Skyrim, like where you create your own character, and in my mind I had like lore already created for my own characters, my oaths, right? I wanted to get more into the mind of this specific character who I was now put into the shoes of. I think I just finished The Last Wish. I did like all of the stories. And then I read Sword of Destiny, which has a little sacrifice. And so I think that here's where the funny part comes in. Maybe not so funny after all. Because in A Little Sacrifice, Geralt ends up sleeping with Essie Davin, who is barely 18. And I was also like barely 18. I was like 17 when I was reading this book. And I was like, what? Because, yeah, as I was talking about in my 10 years of The Witcher 3 video, I had really grown to see Geralt as like a father figure type of character. And yeah, that disturbed me, it icked me out, and I think I did finish the book. I think I did read Sword of Destiny and something more because I wanted to know about his relationship to Ciri. But yeah, after that, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm not reading any more Witcher. Like, maybe it's just the game for me. It's not the books. And then I was like, but okay, I haven't even tried the saga. Maybe the saga is better. And then if you've read chapter 5 of Blood of Elves, then you'll also know that Geralt ends up sleeping with 17-year-old Shani. Yeah, so after that, I put the Witcher books down, and I was like, okay, Andrzej Sapkowski is a freak, and I don't want anything to do with this. But this is actually the funny thing of like how I got back into reading the Witcher books and not just being a game fan. So I completed the Witcher 3 base game and Hearts of Stone, and then I went to Blood and Wine, obviously. And in Blood and Wine, there is a character introduced who immediately caught my attention. And that character is, predictably, Emil Regis, because his introduction in Blood and Wine is, well, let's just say it's very dramatic, but I think that the concept of Geralt, who I had known up until that point to be a witcher, to be a slayer of monsters, even though he spares, quite a few monsters in the base game, to be like besties, such besties with a higher vampire that he's one of the only people that Geralt hugs in The Witcher 3. Like, I think that he only actually hugs Ciri and maybe Vesemir. So I was like, okay, who the fuck is this guy that Geralt is just like, okay, come here, bro, come here. I'm fascinated. What is this fucking relationship? And I was like, okay, maybe I need to read the books, like whatever, let me just get out of this warehouse. And then after I get out of the warehouse, the little notification on the UI pops up that's like, okay, new journal entry, new character entry. And it says Regis's whole fucking name on the character entry. New character entry, Emil Regis Rohelic Tertia Godefroy. And I'm like, who the fuck? That immediately captured me, and I was like, okay, I am missing so much context here. I need to get back into the books immediately. So I just did a little bit of wiki Googling. Maybe don't do that. You will get entirely spoiled. But I'm like, okay, so this guy was like part of this Hansa. What is a Hansa? What the bloody hell is a Hansa? He shows up in Baptism of Fire. Okay, I'm just gonna skip to Baptism of Fire. So I started reading Baptism of Fire, and I actually skipped everything up into the fish soup scene. I realized then, when I was reading the fish soup scene, that Geralt actually has a personality. And that's not to say that he doesn't have any personality in The Witcher 3, but I would say he's much more like confident, kind of snarky Geralt in Witcher 3. But in the books, in Baptism of Fire, he's like a little whiny bitch. And I was like, holy shit, that's actually fascinating. I need to go back to the books. So I just went back and read the books. Even though in the first read of the books, I honestly skipped a lot and I just read the parts about the Hansa because they had captured my heart, okay? As Zoltan says in Baptism of Fire, Chapter 3, like, I took the jelly out of the donut and then I was like, okay, the donut's not sweet anymore, and I threw the donut away, okay? I admit, okay? Because in high school, a lot of the reading was, for class, and I didn't really have time to read other books for pleasure, unfortunately. I was kind of dipping my toe back into the hobby of reading through The Witcher. So after I finished reading the books, I realized that I actually didn't understand a lot of the books. I could follow the plot and the characters and everything, but I didn't know a lot of the deeper reasoning why stuff was happening. For example, the ending of Lady of the Lake. The ending of Lady of the Lake is notoriously confusing for people who do not have the prior knowledge of Arthurian mythology. And so I was like, okay, I have no actually idea what the author meant by this. I'm going to look up some answers. And actually at this point, I was at a desk job at my university where we could actually luckily go on the computers and browse the web, as long as we didn't video stream, because video streaming apparently crashed our internet. So I was able to just browse Reddit in the off time, because at a desk job, you're sitting there and, people will come up, but then you'll be sitting there for 20 minutes and there's no customers. So during the off time, I was allowed to browse the web, and I just went on Reddit and read a bunch of interviews with Andrzej Sapkowski. So yeah, that's the story of how I got into the games and the books and everything sort of surrounding it. The Witcher is like the interest for me that keeps on giving, really, because everything is always deeper than I think it is. And this is the last question about myself personally. Have you experienced snow yet? And yes, I actually have. This question probably relates to a short that I put out where I mentioned that I had actually never seen snow. And since making that short, I actually have. Earlier this year, my girlfriend and I and their family actually went to Yosemite Park, which is a natural park here in California, and I got to see snow for the first time.
Okay guys, I'm gonna touch snow for the first time. Oh my god. Ah! It's so crunchy. You can pack it. Oh my god, it's really cold. Oh my god, it's really cold. Ah.
And yeah, it's cold. It's very cold. We actually went there in spring, so it wasn't actually very snowy, but there was snow at some of the higher elevations and snow that had already fallen. When I was a little kid, I was really fascinated by snow because I had never seen it. But it's in all of the cartoons, of course, whenever there's a winter episode or a Christmas episode. And I was just like, holy shit, this must be amazing. And then I grew up and I'm an adult and I touched it. I'm like, it's cold. That shit is cold. It actually kind of reminds me of how in Crossroads of Ravens, teenage Geralt like really wants to go see the ocean, and his like goal is to like go see the ocean. And then in a little sacrifice, he actually goes and sees the ocean, and he's like, I associate it with unease. Like, I don't know, maybe adulthood ruins your childhood whimsy, but I still felt very whimsical playing around in snow for a little bit. That concludes the questions about me, and next questions will be about the channel. How did you decide on the name of the channel? I mean, I can clearly see the connection to the book Anis Vitre and Nimue, but did you know from the start that this would be the name, or did you consider other ideas? Okay, yes, this is actually like unknown trivia. Originally, the idea for this channel was called Fish Soup Productions, and it was really sort of based in the Hansa and my love for the Hansa, because I wanted to analyze the book characters, because I hadn't really seen videos like that. I had seen videos that are more like lore related. Shout out Proper Bird, Jinzy. She was like the OG Witcher tuber. I don't know if that's our name as YouTubers that do stuff about The Witcher, but she made a lot of awesome lore videos, and I was kind of inspired by her, and I wanted to do my own take on what a Witcher themed video could look like, and I wanted to talk about like the book characters as they are, because I found their relationships and their dynamics and their sort of origins as they're based on fantasy archetypes. I found that all really interesting, and I wanted to share it with everybody. This was in like 2018, 2019, when I had learned that, oh, there's going to be a Netflix series, a Netflix adaptation of The Witcher coming out. I'm sure that because it's a very accurate book adaptation, I'm sure that because it's going to adapt The Witcher books, that people would be very fascinated in what the books actually say, and you know how they adapted them, how they translated the book to the screen. So about that. So I knew that Netflix was going to change things. I was not expecting a perfect adaptation, but the adaptation that we ended up getting was less of an adaptation at all. So yeah. And then I kind of scrapped the project, honestly. And at the time, I was also a student in university, and I just really didn't have time to dedicate to the vision of the YouTube channel that I wanted to make. So yeah, the channel actually almost never came to be. The channel almost was scrapped in its entirety. And so my Fish Soup Productions channel sat empty like since I think 2020 is when I created the channel. And then in 2023, I realized that Sapkowski was actually turning 75 that year, and I hadn't seen any other projects celebrating his birthday. So I wanted to create a sort of biography for him, because I had, at that time, I had read a lot of the interviews, and I found his life like very fascinating, and I was kind of annoyed that like no one else had done it. So I just made a video, not even with my face, just with my voice, talking about his life and his bibliography, and just sort of the interesting stories that went into how he became a writer. And I think it was also around that time that I came up with Anis Vitre for the name of the channel. Recently, I changed it to Anis Vitre with Nimue, because I think that it's nice to have my own name in there. As you might know, in the book Lady of the Lake, Anis Vitre is the island in Loch Blest, which is the location of the Lady of the Lake, of Nimue, the sorceress, who is obsessed with the legend of Ciri and Geralt, and is dedicated her life to researching them and coming up with the actual ending of the legend, which, you know, the Ouroboros bites its tail and it becomes sort of like a circular, timey-wimey sort of deal. I feel like the Anis Vitre parts of The Witcher are actually somewhat unpopular amongst readers, because Sapkowski does this thing with like 2 frame stories at the beginning of the book, and it's like we kind of just want to go back and see what Geralt's doing at this point. We don't need all of these new characters. Like, what are you doing, old man? But after rereading Lady of the Lake, I found this this setting and this character really endearing, really atmospheric, really beautiful, and I really appreciated the whole. Like, the thing is about the sorceress Nimue is that she's not related to the legend of The Witcher at all. She's literally a peasant girl that's living 100 years after Ciri and Geralt were, and she's not really connected to the legend at all, except by her love for it. And it's this love which really leads her on this journey to become a sorceress and to dedicate her life to studying this legend. And I found that really poetic and almost like relatable in a way, because I find myself sort of in a totally different time and space and context than when The Witcher was originally written. Maybe I'm not living 100 years after The Witcher was written, but you know, it is sort of like 30 to 40 years after it was written. And of course also with the different cultural context of being from the US versus being from Poland. But I found it really beautiful and very inspiring that the sorceress, or even the peasant girl Nimue, she doesn't have this innate relationship to the legend the way that, like, say, like Yennefer might, right? Because Yennefer was in the legend, she was part of it. But Nimue isn't part of it until she makes herself part of it, because it's her own effort and her own studying that leads her to where she wants to be. And through her hard work and study, she actually becomes a key figure in allowing the legend to end in the way that it should. Aside from this, Nimue and Ynys Vitre are really defined by madness, by mania, about The Witcher, about the legend. And I feel like that was very relatable from a fandom point of view, because, like, as Nimue says, like, I will demand madness, I will demand the mania from you, converters. I like to think that I demand that sort of madness from my viewers as well, at least for the time being when you're watching my channel. Like the original Nimue, I'm also short. I'm 5'3", so that's something I also relate to her about. The next question is, where do you see this channel going in the next few years? I'm curious what projects you have in store. So kind of a lot of projects. I feel like I'm kind of silent about what I'm working on because I don't want to spoil what I'm working on. And I also don't want to give false hope in case sometimes the videos don't turn out the way I want, and then I can kind of quietly scrap them. But right now I'm working on quite a few different things. Recently I uploaded my Zalaika video, which was a long time in the making. I started filming that in like November of last year, and I finally got to post it. Similarly to that, I actually have 2 more videos that I've been filming since last winter, and I'm only finishing up editing now. Those 2 are the concert review video from October, and also my Regis Netflix analysis video, which I started filming in December. And the Regis video actually it's gone through so many revisions at this point. I added a lot more to it, and I reshot it actually about 4 times now. But I really want to make that video very well edited and very in-depth, because I feel like, once I make the video on Regis's character or on any character, I don't want to be constantly re-adding to it. With the concert video also, I really procrastinated on this video, honestly, because I find my own excitement very difficult to watch. It's sort of like hearing your own laughter sort of thing. But I really had a great time at the concert, and I want to also put enough depth into that review that it's substantial and it's not just like, hey guys, I had a great time, but I really want to go into sort of analyzing the narrative decisions they made and like the choice of music that they performed also, and just sort of like speculate on how this relates to the Witcher in the American market going forward also. In addition to that, I'm also working on 2 more videos related to Songs of the Past, which I hope to have out a little bit sooner rather than the concert and Regis video. The first is more of a casual video going over like a theory that I have. It's kind of just like a random batshit insane theory that I have. I don't think it's actually going to happen, but in case it does, in case my predictions are true, I kind of want to just put it out there and be like, okay, I don't know if it would actually be relevant at all to what actually ends up happening, but I just wanted to put it out there. And the second is more of a structured essay that I'm currently in the middle of writing, but I want to get it out around the time of Gamescom because there's probably going to be an influx of more Songs of the Past related content during that time. And in addition to that, I also have a couple of other videos that I've been working on, but I will probably talk more about them in answers to other questions. That's the more short-term vision of the channel that I have, like until the end of the year. But there are also some ideas that I have for the next few years. First of all, I want to make more videos analyzing the books and giving more attention to the books specifically. I think that for me, it's a little bit hard to consider how I'm going to frame that because just generally speaking, Netflix-related videos and game-related videos typically do better than the book solely related videos. So sometimes I have to find a way to kind of spin it and relate it to either the games or the Netflix series. But I really want to analyze some of the deeper themes about the books and get into scenes that people might find confusing or challenging on their first read, because I think that I didn't really have that support when I was first reading the books, and as I said, I almost quit reading the books. I almost dropped them forever and never touched them again. So I'd love to kind of represent why I love the book so much, for the deep themes and symbolism that they have going on, and sort of also analyze potentially what Sapkowski's intention was behind some of these scenes, going through the things that he said in the interviews that he's given. Secondarily, in the far future, I think this is more a far future goal, I'd also love to make a sort of narrative-focused project, but I don't think I should really talk too much about that right now because I don't want to spoil it, and I also don't want to give false hope of things that I said I would do and then I end up never actually doing them. The next question is there a Witcher topic that you've wanted to make a video about for a long time but haven't gotten around to yet? And what's your dream Witcher video to make one day? Good question. So I'm actually working on a couple of more videos in my From Wiedźmin to Witcher series, which currently it only has one episode in October of 2024, I think that I did. But I have not forgotten about it. I still am working on scripts that follow up that video about transmedia. And the reason it's taking so long is because I think that these kinds of videos involve a lot of real life research, representing culture and transition and migration of people. And I really want to kind of respect those journeys and pay attention to the lived experiences of those people. And sometimes I'm talking about the effects of difficult subjects like corruption and immigration. So I really want to sort of dot my I's and cross my T's to make sure that everything is actually backed up by research, and that research is verifiable as good research and not just other people's opinions that I'm now parroting. But yeah, one of these videos is actually related to a topic that I get asked about a lot, which is, I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to spoil it because if I don't actually get around to making this video, then everyone's gonna be like, "Where's that video?" But I will just say you can see it on the shelf behind me. So that's all I'll say. One more question about the videos that I want to make or I'm working on. Are there any Witcher topics you intentionally avoid because they're too controversial or because you feel they've already been discussed enough? So, I actually have 2 other videos that I'm working on. How many videos am I actually working on that haven't been posted yet? I haven't actually been keeping track of the number. But there's 2 other videos that I've worked on that I do want to post at some point, but I feel like I need to revise them again for sensitivity purposes. And these videos are about 1, Zerrikania, and 2, how the Second Nilfgaardian War parallels the Second World War. And you can probably guess why these topics are controversial. The first video is controversial because it deals with the representation of race and ethnicity in media, which I really want to be sensitive about, and I really want to be careful talking about it because I feel like the fandom doesn't have the best track record of being respectful on this topic. But it also deals with something I'm really passionate about, which is ancient history. So I hope that I do get to post this video at some point. But I wanted to, after I recorded it and I watched the footage back, I felt like I didn't really talk enough about certain aspects of this topic to the point where I felt like I was giving the topic the degree of sensitivity that I would want it to have before I posted it. In the second video about the Second World War, I talk about the Nazi invasion of Poland, and I felt like this was a very controversial topic, not only for the devastation that I'm going over in that video, but also because of the topics that I do not talk about in that video. For example, I don't really go over the Holocaust, which I think is the largest topic that's ever discussed when it comes to the Second World War. And after I got done editing that video, I felt really weird about posting it because it's a topic that I don't really talk about in that video, and it felt almost like I was sort of ignoring it, which I definitely do not want to do. But yeah, it was not intentional to ignore it. It's just that like the topic of the video is not really about that. In actuality, the reason why I wanted to make this video is because like during my high school education, when we first learned about the Second World War, we talked a lot about the Holocaust, but we didn't actually talk about what the German invasion looked like. And I think that that's something that Baptism of Fire really goes into. Another reason why I didn't really like the final product of this video was because I wasn't really talking about the Soviet invasion of Poland, which happened basically simultaneously with the Nazi invasion. And I felt kind of weird just being like, I already talked about the Soviet invasion of Poland in my Rise and Fall of the Witcher video, so go check that video out if you want that, because it's all sort of like intertwined. And another reason why this video was controversial was because it was related to the Skoy tile, which of course is like the largest controversy, and I think it's also really related to modern politics too. So I just felt like unequipped to deal with the broadness of this topic. And I think like especially as an American who does not understand a lot of the cultural nuances and histories, and I feel like I have to do like a lot of extra research to make sure that what I'm saying is not influenced by biased sources. So yeah. How do you find resources for your research? You are always so thorough with it, it's impressive. Oh, thank you. I think that's actually a great question, especially in the age of AI that we're living in, where people think that you can just like ask a question into AI and it will give you the answers. One of my favorite resources is Google Scholar, which is like Google, it's a search engine, but it's for academic articles, and you can search keywords that will relate to what you want to learn about. JSTOR is also really good. I used to have institutional access through my library card, but then I don't know if that like program stopped, but I haven't been able to access JSTOR for like a year, so I had to stop using it in my research. And I also like going on Wikipedia just for like a basic overview of it. But of course, like citing Wikipedia is like, eh. So what I like to do instead is go to the resources which are cited in the Wikipedia article and then follow up with those, because typically you'll be led to like books and articles that just go a lot more in depth than the general Wikipedia article does. Google Books is really good to access full books. Sometimes they do have the full book on there. And if you can't find the full book online, you can always go to your local library. Or sometimes what I like to do is, you know, if the wife of the Bloody Baron from Witcher 3 had a collection of books, that might be called Anna's Archive of Books. I don't know if that, maybe. And I think also just looking at where information comes from and how it might be biased potentially. When I'm looking for resources on Polish identity, for example, I try to not get things written by Americans. I try to get things written by Polish people, actually, because I think that they will probably know more about their own culture than the Americans will. That should lead into the next topic, which is about Poland overall. The first question is, I noticed that you are not only interested in The Witcher, but Poland overall, Polish history, Sienkiewicz's trilogy, inserting some random Polish words in your essays, etc. Where does this fascination come from? I would say it comes from The Witcher. Generally, I mean, talking about The Witcher, it is a Polish series, and something important to me as a content creator, and a content creator who is American and based in the US, I feel like it's important to actually respect the culture it comes from and respect that it was written in Polish and not English. I think that that's just sort of like the basic level of authenticity I can give as someone who is not part of that culture. And it would also kind of annoy me a lot when I would be watching YouTubers and they would always use the phrase when they're pronouncing a word from a language they don't speak, "Oh my God, I just butchered that so badly, I'm sorry." Like without even trying to make an effort to pronounce it correctly. Because if you made an effort to pronounce it correctly, you wouldn't have to say, "Oh my God, I just butchered that so badly." Which it felt very like self-centered to say. To me, that seems very self-centered because it's kind of focusing more on yourself and your wretched inability to say the word rather than just like going on Google Translate and then listening how the word is pronounced and trying your best to emulate that. And more than that, I think it just distracts from the essay when you try to put the focus on yourself rather than the topic at hand. And I think that just putting that little bit of extra effort in to look up how a word or a name is pronounced just shows that you are passionate and respect the topic. I think that also just talking about The Witcher in general, there are, because it's Andrzej Sapkowski, you guys, like there's going to be a lot of references to Polish history and to, like, for example, Sienkiewicz's trilogy. It's impossible to make a video about The Witcher, to me, without talking about these topics. And for me, my fascination really comes from the fact that I want to go in depth with my videos and I don't want to just repeat opinions that have been said already 100 times or just say my own opinions without actually doing any research and considering like where my opinions come from, because of course like I have my own cultural realm that I'm exposed to. I have my own experiences that may be really different than Andrzej Sapkowski's experiences, for example. Because I think that also like when you come at things without educating yourself on them first, you can kind of come off offensive or just rude. But I think that's more on the negative side of things. On the positive side of things, I think it's just interesting to hear my friends talk about their culture, and then just because of what they talked about, I got interested in learning more about it. So yeah, I would say it's just my desire to go more in depth into what I'm reading. And I also, I don't know, I also just sort of like appreciate the historical and cultural references in The Witcher, and also the style of comedy and the style of humor. I think that is a little bit different than maybe what I'm exposed to here in the US. So yeah. Your pronunciation is very impressive, but I'm sure that it took some time to prepare, especially for the first videos. Do you still have to work on that repeating words several times before you feel prepared when saying something in Polish, or are you already quite comfortable with your capabilities and it doesn't take much effort? Yes, I do have to retake things multiple times before I get the pronunciation right. But in general, I try not to include that struggling with the Polish language as much in my videos and like the final cuts, because I feel like while it's somewhat entertaining, it's also a little bit, I feel like the joke would just get old quickly, right? I feel like it's a little bit disrespectful to be like, oh my God, the language is so complicated. I don't know how to say a word. How do you even speak this language? It's like, you know, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of when I was in school and we would have a substitute teacher and they would like try to pronounce my name. And then the teacher would like try to like make a joke out of it and be like, wow, your name's so exotic. Like I've never heard that name before. And I'm like, thanks. You know, in some cases it might make people laugh. It might make them feel proud because like, it's hard, isn't it, right? But I kind of just don't want to make a spectacle of, oh, Polish language is so difficult, because it just, yeah, the joke would get old like so quickly on this channel anyways, because as I said, like I feel like the Polish idea of The Witcher is really important and I want to preserve it or include it in videos whenever I can. Is visiting Poland because of The Witcher on your bucket list? Yes, definitely. I do want to go to Poland maybe in the next couple of years, but I feel like there's a lot of, again, there's a lot of research that I need to do before I actually commit to like buying a plane ticket. So I don't think it will be anytime soon, unfortunately. But it is something that I want to do eventually, and I'll make a vlog out of it, potentially. Something that I really want to do is see the musical adaptation of The Witcher, which is in Gdynia. And they actually have subtitles, I heard, that play with the English translation. So even if I can't speak Polish by that time that I visit, I think it would be a really cool experience, because I've heard really great things about that musical. I'm also interested in the LARPing scene there, but I feel like I'm not experienced enough to commit. As an American fan, was there anything in the books that felt unfamiliar or surprising because of your cultural background? And was there anything in the books that made you think, this definitely wasn't written by a Western fantasy author? Yes, and I would say it's everything that happens in Time of Contempt to Baptism of Fire. I don't think that an American author could have come up with that. Just because of the various political factions that are involved, I feel like as Tomasz Baginski said in his infamous interview, that Americans see the world as more like black and white and there's only two sides to a conflict. But Sapkowski includes so many different political factions, and they're also very varied within themselves. It's not just like, oh, everyone within this faction believes the same exact thing. For example, I think one of the things that the Netflix series got offensively wrong was somehow having all of the elves, just every single elf, basically having the same political belief about what the elves should do in relation to the humans. When in the Witcher books, it's really, really complicated. I mean, there's elves that live in cities, there's elves that are part of the Scoia'tael, there's elves that just live in Dol Blatana and settled there after they kick the humans out. The elves are not a monolith, okay? And I think that this is somewhat a little bit difficult to grasp, especially for, I think, younger American authors. And I mean, like, we literally have a two-party system here in our government. So, but I think that, like, Sapkowski representing the Tanid coup with a bunch of different political actors, and also people who are neutral and just want to stay the fuck out of the conflict, that felt, like, very European to me politically. I'm actually going to relate this to another question, which is, which war crime or political decision from the books do you think readers don't talk enough about? And that is the dual invasion of Aedirn by Cédfaen and Nilfgaard. I already talked about this a little bit in my Rise and Fall video, but it's really a parallel to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which divided Poland between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And I feel like that is a very uniquely Polish perspective. I think that that wouldn't inherently come to the mind of an American author, because I think, I mean, I'm not trying to generalize, but I feel like an American author would just come up with like one baddie faction, and then the others just good guys or at least politically neutral. As for stuff that felt unfamiliar or surprising, I think that this is much less severe than talking about war. But particularly, like, the friendship between Geralt and Dandelion felt very unique to me. It still feels very unique to me. I don't know if this is tied specifically to the culture of The Witcher, but Geralt and Dandelion are not like a sort of lovey-dovey friendship the way that some people on AO3 depict. They're more like sarcastic and playful with each other, and they sometimes like insult each other by just directly telling them what's wrong with them to their face. I feel like if an American author wanted to represent like a best friendship, they might have them be like more like commonly like openly supportive of one another, and Geralt would be like, Dandelion, your music is amazing. I love your music. Instead of, you know, like in Season of Storms when Dandelion is like, you never ask me to play my music. And then Geralt's like, yeah, because I know you will anyways. And Dandelion's like, damn right I will. Again, I don't really know if this is based in culture, but it's definitely something that felt unique to me. And despite this attitude and nerve that they take up with one another, they're still really loyal to each other, as we see in Time of Contempt Chapter 5. That seems like a perfect time to transition into questions about the books, so let's talk about the books. Did reading the books change the way that you see the games? If so, in what way? Definitely so. I think that the books are actually a lot darker than The Witcher 3. I actually haven't played the other games so far. Whoops. I'm a mediocre Witcher fan, actually. Whoops. But yeah, in general, I think that the books are a lot darker and go into more adult themes like sexual assault than The Witcher 3 does. On the other hand, I feel like the books also have more highs, or more intense emotional highs. And they also have a lot more deeper friendships for Geralt than The Witcher 3 does. I feel like after finishing the saga, going back to The Witcher 3 felt very lonely for me because, well, what happens during the end of Lady of the Lake in Chapter 9, it felt very lonely experience going back into Witcher 3, and like Geralt is riding alone on Roach, and there is no Hansa, there is no Regis, there is no Milva, there is no Kahira Kelock, and there's no Angoulême either. But yeah, I think that reading the books reintroduced me to a lot of the characters, and it took me a while to really understand that these are two separate canons, because coming from The Witcher 3, I was inclined to believe that the books to the games is a more clear continuation, whereas now I feel more like the games definitely take inspiration from the books and try to continue them, using them as a background for their plot. But they are not a direct continuation as we would like to, as perhaps many people would like to consider them as being. That's just my opinion. That actually leads me to another question, which is, what is your most controversial Witcher opinion? And that is that I think that the books and games are entirely separate mediums, which honestly is actually not a very controversial topic, but somehow it becomes one. I think that the games, honestly, a lot of writing decisions in the games should be considered with the same level of criticism as we apply to the Netflix show. I feel like people hear this opinion and they think that like, oh, so you're saying that the games are trash just like the Netflix series? And it's like, no, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that like we should be as critical about the changes made, about the narrative changes made, as we are with the Netflix series, because it's only fair. However, that's not to say that the games are now bad like the Netflix show. I think it's much more interesting to see how the games are still good and worth playing, even though they are different than the books. That being said, I think it's also completely valid to be annoyed by some of the changes made or to not like them. For example, everything in The Witcher 3 with Emir and Ciri and their relationship, which is much different in the books than it is represented in The Witcher 3. Because in the books, Emir is not a potential ally of Geralt and Yennefer, okay? He is the main antagonist from which the entire conflict of Sintra being destroyed and set aflame and razed is born from. He is the one that pursued Ciri relentlessly across the continent and set fire to like half of the northern kingdoms. And he did this because I don't know if I can actually even get into the details of his plot because it wouldn't abide by YouTube's community guidelines. But then Witcher 3 somewhat retcons this or just ignores it. For example, false Ciri not being there. Even though she was there in previous iterations of the game's writing, she was not there in the final product, right? I think that false Ciri not being there and his morganatic marriage to false Ciri not being explained is really weird when we start to talk about like Emir and Ciri's like relationship, because they don't even have a relationship. This is a thing, because Witcher 3 would posit Emir as Ciri's father, as her biological father, who is like trying to be more present in her life because he was just sort of like an absent father and now he like wants to do better. No. When people come in from The Witcher 3 with this idea, this misrepresentation of who Emir is and his relationship to Ciri, it can kind of really ruin the themes of the books, which really highly establish that Geralt and no other is Ciri's father. That's just what I'm gonna say. Emir is not Ciri's father. He is her fucking terrorist who destroyed her city, who destroyed all of these countries, trying to do the most repulsive act known to man. But this is just like an example of like the games and the books are not the same canon. They are separate canons, they are separate stories. So I think that in general, trying to reconcile the books and the games as being part of the same story and the perfect continuation, and they can all like kumbaya and it's just all interlinked together. It kind of takes away from the mediums, the separate mediums that they are of a book series versus a game series, and the different changes in writing that come with that. Because the nature of a linear book series is going to be a lot different than a game series that is predicated on choice and wants the player to choose their own actions and have branching storylines. But back to the books, because we were talking about the books. Many say that Sapkowski thrives on short stories, and anything else he wrote that wasn't a short story is mediocre. Do you find it to be so? If I found it to be so, I wouldn't be making this channel. I really love the saga, actually. I do think that, okay, here's my opinion. I do think that Blood of Elves was the weakest book in the Witcher series, but it was his first novel, okay? No one's first novel is going to be perfect. But I think that the main issue I have with Blood of Elves is that it reads like multiple short stories in an anthology rather than one complete novel. But I think that even by Time of Contempt, he had already reckoned with this problem. Even though Time of Contempt does have more of a slow start, I think, and then, you know, in chapter 4, everything sort of fucking explodes and then we get into the action. I think that Time of Contempt is where it reads more like a full, complete novel rather than short stories lined up with one another. I just disagree with this opinion because I like the novels. I mean, Baptism of Fire is my favorite book in the series, and I think that Baptism of Fire, Tower of the Swallow, and Lady of the Lake are all like the most awesome books. But I do agree that Sapkowski is a master of the short form, and his short stories are particularly better than the novels, but that doesn't make the novels bad. It just makes them less good than the short stories, which are freaking amazing. And I think that, like, actually the strongest book in the Witcher series is Sword of Destiny, particularly because it's in this anthology format, but the stories told all relate to one another and the themes are so consistent through them. And then something more like really ties everything together. I am really impressed by that structure that he developed in Sword of Destiny, and I cannot imagine doing something like that as a writer. That's freaking insane. But yeah, I think that based on like structure and pacing and like whether the books are like good or not, I would definitely not call the saga mediocre. I think that the saga is awesome. Also, have you read the Hussite Trilogy, and is there a visible difference in the way he wrote it compared to The Witcher? Yes, I have read the Hussite Trilogy. I've only read it one time though, so that's why I have not done a review on it yet, because I feel like the Hussite Trilogy is really complex and it's also very political, even more importantly political than The Witcher is, because it's dealing with real life history. I feel like my analysis on the Hussite Trilogy is more like shallow than my analysis on The Witcher, which is more in depth, but I still have my opinions on it. In the way that it's written, I do feel like the Hussite Trilogy is just so fast-paced. The Hussite Trilogy is really paced at a breakneck speed, actually, to the point where I was almost like, can we slow down, please, and just have the characters have a conversation and have more of that sort of relationship development that they kind of had in The Witcher. And he does do this usually towards the end of the book. There are parts in which the characters can have that connection and formation. But I feel like the Hussite Trilogy is much more driven by the plot than it is by the characters. if that makes sense. But it still has Sapkowski's, iconic sense of humor. It has really in-depth references to the history. It has really intense themes about politics and idealism and religion. Rainovan was also a very endearing character, and I love him. He is my Blorble also. Although I would say that I think one other criticism I have of the Hussite Trilogy, or maybe not just criticism, but just something, opinion of it in general, is that the Hussite Trilogy has less female characters than The Witcher, and it has less page time for them. And I understand why that is, because it's a historical fantasy. There's just less opportunity for them to have the page time. But when they do have the page time, it blows my mind every time. I think that The Witch's Sabbath is actually one of the best things that Sapkowski has ever written. It's chapter 25 of Narrenturm, so yeah, it's really good. Then again, I also feel like the function of the female characters in the Hussite Trilogy is more symbolic related, but that's not to say that I didn't enjoy it. Another thing about the Hussite Trilogy is that I feel like Rainovan gets to be on his own a lot, or there's just a larger cast of characters that he interacts with. I wanted more of the Charlotte and Samson Rainovan dynamic. I feel like we didn't get enough page time with them. In general, I think that The Witcher develops its relationships between the characters more, but the Hussite Trilogy has a more tighter story in which I feel like for The Witcher there's a lot of parts in which the story is slower paced, in which the story kind of sags, and the Hussite Trilogy is just so freaking breakneck paced that there is no way in which you could insert something else into it and be like, oh, what happened here? It wasn't explained. Everything is pretty much explained, I feel already. But then again, I've only read it once, so maybe I'm just missing a lot of it. But yeah. Also, I hear you about making a Hussite Trilogy video. I do want to make a review video. Again, I just feel like I don't know enough about it to make a well-educated video, but I could just make a general review video where I'm not that educated and I'm just giving my general opinion on it. Favorite tertiary character from the Witcher books? Mine is Cohen. He deserved better. That is true. He deserved better. But he was also a hero, and I like how he was moved by Triss's words on war, so much so that he joined the Battle of Brenna. And also when they reveal that the subject is a Witcher and you realize it's Cohen, you're just like, fuck! But my favorite tertiary character is, okay, I don't know if she's considered tertiary, but Angoulême, I don't talk about her enough. Angoulême is one of my favorite characters from the Witcher books. She's so funny, and she has the most disturbing, sad backstory, and yet she's freaking hilarious at the same time. It's funny because I feel like we are quite opposite personalities, but at the same time I really relate to her, and I just think that she brings an energy to Geralt's Hansa that was not previously there. I love how she challenges all the members of Geralt's Hansa and sort of shakes them up when they've already formed. And the funny thing is that Sapkowski was not actually intending to keep her around, but she just stuck to the author's pen. And so he just kept her in because he liked her. And I was like, yes, this is the best decision. And I know that a lot of people in the fandom don't like her because they don't get the point of her, or they find her annoying. And I'm just like, you don't see the vision, okay? You don't see the vision. Because Angoulême is also symbolically, she's also a variation of what Ciri symbolizes, because they find Angoulême in this point where they've been arguing as a company and everything is fucking falling apart. And I feel like Angoulême's presence somehow also reminds them of Ciri, and that's what brings Geralt and Cahir to blows, because their conflict is over Ciri. But at the same time, she also helps reunite the company because of this reminder of Ciri. And I feel like that's also really tragic, though, because unlike Ciri, Angoulême doesn't have anyone that's coming to save her, even though she was in a very similar position to Ciri as a war orphan that was from Sintra and became abandoned. Like Ciri, she's gone through a lot of horrible trauma, but she doesn't have a Geralt and a Yennefer. So I really love that she becomes part of Geralt's Hansa, and that they kind of adopt her and she gets to annoy them all. And also my favorite friendship within that would probably be between Regis and Angoulême, because I think it's freaking hilarious how they are entirely opposites. We have the young and the old, and I love that he starts picking up her catchphrases and saying them, even though they're quite vulgar. I also think that she's particularly interesting because she is positioned as somewhat of a confusing and almost foreign element for her catchphrases, but her catchphrases are translated from English into Polish, and then when they are translated back into English, it doesn't really make sense anymore, because it's like, well, what's weird about, oh, look what the cat dragged in, because that's a real saying in English. So I love that Sapkowski was playing with language and cultural identity while writing this character, especially because Angoulême, like as a character archetype, I feel like she's just like a female version of Oliver Twist almost, and she is sort of like this like Victorian English orphan. And she also reminds me of like other orphan archetypes, like for example Annie, the musical Annie, which I really loved as a kid. Another thing I love about Angoulême is how her character relates back to the broader themes of The Witcher, of this pattern Sapkowski has of using a character archetype and then subverting that archetype, because I feel like her archetype of this orphan, usually these orphan stories have a happy ending where you know, their parents might be dead, but they find a new family and they find this like familial love that they've been missing. The orphans themselves never lost connection with their biological parents, and they felt their love even after death. And with Angoulême, it's just like she's like, oh yeah, I just stopped giving a shit about my mom. And it's just like, oh, so heartbreaking. And she lost her mom's medallion gambling it away in a game of dice. It's so real. It's so tragically real. And I think that Angoulême's very teenager, very disengaged, bitter attitude, it speaks to a lot of the trauma that she's experienced. And I love that The Witcher has these realistic representations of how trauma affects people. Angoulême is sort of like the representation of like, my trauma made me funny, but in her case it's actually true. Because in The Witcher there are no perfect victims, and the way that Angoulême is somewhat problematic for the Hansa to integrate into their company, I think it's just like this perfect dynamic, and it really just sends them on like the next level of entertaining. Also because in Baptism of Fire, the original members of Geralt's company join because they kind of want to atone for their past. They want to find that expiation, that baptism of fire with one another. And then Angoulême joins in Tower of the Swallow, and she's just like, so what's up, you guys? Like, she's not atoning for anything. She's just there. Again, a lot of people don't like her because she's like kind of randomly put in there, and it wasn't really intended to be this core member of the Hansa, and by coincidence became part of them. But I freaking love that. It represents how life is so random, and also like, you know, how Ciri is the child of destiny. Angoulême is like the child of coincidence. And so yeah, I just love her. What's the funniest line in the books that still makes you laugh? I mean, there are a few. There are a lot of lines, I would say, that are really funny, and I still laugh at them even when I reread. But the one that comes to mind for me is in chapter 5 of Baptism of Fire, when Geralt and Dandelion are escaping Fort Armeria, and Dandelion gets grazed in the head by an arrow, and he yells, "They've killed me! I'm bleeding! I'm dying!" And then the narration says, like, Dandelion yelled impressively loudly for a dead man. The final question for the books is, do you prefer the writing style in the translations done by David French or Danusia Stok? David French, if we're going off of just the official translations, but I really do like the fan translations of The Witcher, because I was raised on the fan translations. That's what I initially started reading The Witcher as. And I feel like when the fan translations are like a little clunky or like don't make sense, I don't know, I like really like it because it just reminds me that I'm reading a translation. And I know that might not be the case for everyone though. Of course, the fan translations aren't perfect though, because sometimes they can get things like factually wrong. For example, also related to Angoulême, in Tower of the Swallow, her medallion is of a sea cat, also called a mer cat, like a mermaid, but a cat. But they actually translate it as a meerkat. So like the African animal that like stands up and does this. And so I was like, wait, what? But the thing is that my confusion was actually helpful because it actually got me looking up like, what is a mercat? What is a sea cat? And then I learned that's actually a real Polish coat of arms. It's the kot morski. And also that was in Sapkowski's manuscript discovered in a dragon's cave, where he goes into his bestiary and he mentions the sea cat as actually monkeys. Yes, because there were these monkeys on ships allegedly, and people didn't know what to call them, so they just called them sea cats. The more you know. Sorry, I have Angoulême on the brain for like the next couple of questions. And that concludes the questions for the books, and now let's go into the games. The first question about the games comes from Z on Coffee, and they ask, have you played CDPR's Witcher games other than The Witcher 3 or plan to? And how would you score the games you've played in terms of adaptation/continuation of the books? Assuming they're not all a 10 out of 10, which things do you most wish were handled better? As I mentioned, I haven't played Witcher 1 or Witcher 2, even though I'm planning to, and I also have played like a little bit of Thronebreaker, but I haven't really gotten that far in the game yet. Like literally, like I'm on the first chapter, like the beginning stage of the game still. So I'm a little bit underqualified to answer this question, but I do, as I mentioned, find the games and the books to be like separate canons. In terms of adaptation and continuation of the books, I think that CDPR does really well in adapting the atmosphere and the vibe of the books, as well as creating their own stories, which maybe are not the exact replica of the books, but are similar in tone, I think. I think another question I also got in relation to this one is what's a story from the Witcher games which could have been written by Sapkowski, or like feels like it could have been written by Sapkowski. And for me, I would say that's the Family Matters questline in The Witcher 3. It felt very in tone with the Witcher books, in the fact that there's greater and there's lesser evils, and everyone's at fault, and simultaneously no one is at fault. That it's about a very interpersonal topic. It deals with subjects like abuse, alcoholism, and child-parent estrangement, that it also really relates, or, you know, is a kind of opposite of Geralt and Ciri's relationship, even though that Geralt and the Baron are both searching for their respective daughters. Geralt and the Baron are kind of opposite kinds of fathers. It's also a very tragic questline, and there's no perfect ending. There's no real good yay ending. I feel like even the good ending in Family Matters is like concerning, and I still don't really trust Philip Strenger with his wife, honestly. So yeah, I think that for adaptation of the books, it's really more about the atmosphere and the vibe than just like the one-to-one character adaptation. Which game do you think looks the most accurate to how the Witcher world is described in the books? Character designs, lighting and colors, map design, etc. Although I concede that I did not play Witcher 1 and Witcher 2 yet, I would say that the first Witcher game has the most accurate atmosphere, or it just feels like, especially like in the villages, it feels very Witcher-y. And then I think that Witcher 3 actually really nails it for the atmosphere that I imagine from the books, but also I am biased because I got into Witcher through The Witcher 3. But that opinion is more about the atmosphere and the settings of The Witcher, for example, like the Velen, Novigrad, Skellige, Beauclair, right? But I feel like for the character designs, actually like none of the games are really accurate to the books in that regard, which is why I really like seeing fan interpretations and fan art of the characters from the books. What are your favorite and least favorite changes in continuity from the books to the games? Okay, I already talked about Emir. The other controversial topic that I'll talk about right now is probably the whole Yen versus Triss thing, because I feel like the way it is set up in The Witcher 3 is misleading to the books. I also feel like people put too much emphasis on the last wish and the wish that Geralt made, when in reality, I feel like it doesn't actually really matter what the wish was, because as the audience, we did not hear the wish. We don't know what it was. And I even read people saying that Yennefer and Geralt's relationship is akin to the movie Obsession, which recently came out. And I was just like, okay, this interpretation just is wrong. Sorry, it's just wrong. Because I think that the point of Geralt and Yennefer in the books is that like the wish was not enough to give them a happy ending, right? Because the last wish, the story, ends and we're led to believe like, oh, it's just they live happily ever after. And then we open Bounds of Reason, we open Limits of the Possible in the anthology Sword of Destiny, and we learn that is not true. And the point is that they both need to achieve emotional maturity and move past their past childhood traumas in order to love one another fully. And I think that focusing so heavily on, oh my God, the wish is binding Geralt and Yennefer together, and who knows if they actually really love one another. That conflict was already resolved in the short stories, in something more, and also in A Little Sacrifice. Actually, Limits of the Possible was written before The Last Wish, and The Last Wish was only written retroactively when Sapkowski needed another story to fill out the Last Wish anthology. Because like the Sword of Destiny anthology was actually published in 1992, which is before the publication of The Last Wish in 1993. So when people try to focus on The Last Wish as if it makes or breaks Geralt and Yennefer's relationship, as Dandelion says, nay, 'twas only the beginning. So I think that focusing only on the beginning of the character arc and not like what it grew into is probably the largest mistake of The Witcher 3. And that take kind of goes for the whole thing of like character relationships in general. although I do understand it because you need to have a story to tell in The Witcher 3 itself. So taking all the characters back to square one of their development is somewhat just an easy way to make that happen. Also, the reason why Triss is even a romantic option in Witcher 3 is because she is there in The Witcher 1 and The Witcher 2. Yennefer is the romance option from a book's perspective. Triss is the romance option from a game's perspective. This question comes from Mars on Coffee, and it is, are you or have you been a fan of other authors, franchises, or games with a big fan base? And have you felt the difference in how open the community of The Witcher was in terms of gatekeeping? For example, to newcomers who discover The Witcher through the Netflix series, who are technically a part of the fan base. I have been part of large fan bases in the past, although not very often, more like occasionally. Although my first fandom love was Percy Jackson and the Olympians, which I was very into as a kid. Although I feel like it's a little bit of a different context because the Percy Jackson movies were really bad, but I think that people had read the books in the fandom. This is the thing. And that there were just more people available to say that this was a terrible adaptation. And I think the fact that maybe the fan base was a lot younger, so people had more free time to be reading, or also that the Percy Jackson books are children's books, so they're very easy to read. I feel like it got more people into the books that way, and I never really saw like any sort of discourse of like, oh, let people enjoy things. Like the movies are fine the way they are. Like I think that even people who watched the movies were like, this was confusing and bad, and I want to read the books now. Whereas I feel like with The Witcher Netflix, I've seen a lot more arguments between the Netflix fandom and the books fandom. I'm just going to say, like, on both sides of the Witcher fandom, on the Netflix side versus the book side, I feel like there's a sort of inability to hear the other side out because, I mean, on my side, on the book side, the Netflix show is just so offensively bad to me that it's very difficult to remain civil at times. On the other hand, I feel like from the Netflix fandom, there has been a lot of, let me just say, ignorance or non-receptiveness to listening to why the Netflix adaptation does not work as an adaptation and insisting that this is a valid representation of The Witcher. I think it's also really more culturally complex because the Witcher adaptation, the Netflix adaptation, was really marketed towards an American and British demographic, whereas the original series is from Poland and has more audience in Central and Eastern Europe. But for the Percy Jackson books and movies, I think it was like the same sort of general demographic. Maybe the movies were aimed a little bit more at like an older audience than the books are, but it was still like the American youth demographic. So we're only dealing with one culture. So I think that a complicating factor for The Witcher Netflix is that it gained this sort of almost cultural offensiveness because of how it completely spat in the face of any sort of relation to Polish culture that it could have potentially had. And then I feel like the fan base that the Netflix series garnered in the US were not really receptive to hearing why it was culturally insensitive as a product. That might be reading too much into it. Of course, this is just my opinion as a Witcher YouTuber and also as an American fan of The Witcher. But it felt more like a cultural battle than just a battle about the show itself. The Witcher Netflix is completely void of any culture or soul, in my opinion. So I feel like because of this reason, the community of The Witcher books innately became more closed off and more gatekeepy, mainly because we kind of want to preserve the story that we already have. And I think that with The Witcher Netflix, like my experience with the Netflix fandom is that it just sort of started to overtake everything. And for a while, I think like for like an entire year after the first season released, it was pretty impossible to find book-related content about The Witcher online. And just for memoriam, okay, just because of posterity, until season 2 dropped, basically everyone, or the majority opinion, as I experienced it, was that The Witcher Netflix was a great adaptation and only got a few things wrong from the books, which is an inaccurate take, in my opinion. The Witcher Netflix season 1 got so many things wrong from the books. It was not at all an accurate adaptation. But if you talked badly about the Netflix show, for a long time it was like, oh, you're just a hater and we don't have to listen to you and let people enjoy what they want. While also ignoring the fact that they got like the actual core themes of the books completely wrong and had the opposite messages that the books had. So I think that's some of the reasoning behind the tension between the book and the Netflix fan bases, and why the book fandom was not entirely accepting of newcomers to the Witcher fandom through the Netflix series. And particularly about that topic, I feel like the newcomers from the Netflix series were sometimes, but really not always, receptive to the way things were in the books, or like the book version of events, which were entirely different than the way that the Netflix series portrayed them. Because the Netflix series and the books are just entirely contradictory to one another, and if you believe one version of events, you cannot believe the other version, because they basically cannot coexist. They cannot next to each other exist, as Yarpen Zegrin said. It's like someone saying it's nighttime and someone saying it's daytime. Like, these two opinions cannot both be true. And that's not a hate to anyone who got into The Witcher through the Netflix series, but it's just sort of a fact of that these two versions of the Witcher are so separate that it's almost impossible to believe both, to accept both as the canon. Of course, you can still, enjoy the Netflix show, I guess, even though I personally find it myself very offensive. I know that some people still enjoy the show because it's so bad it's good. But in general, like, I think that interpreting the characters and the major themes and like what the media stands for, what it says, it's really difficult to try to have both the Netflix series and the book series in the same fandom because of that. It also really boils down to the fact that the characters from the show and the character from the books are really, really different. For example, if someone's a fan of Jaskier from the Netflix show, they are not inherently a fan of Dandelion or Jaskier from the books, because these are two very separate, different characters. And I think that even more tension happens when people introduced from the version of the show come to the books and then start trashing the books because it's not what they expected, because of the expectations that the show set up. Like, I've literally seen posts that have been like, I love Jaskier from the show, but Dandelion from the books deserves to die. He's like a horrible person. And it's like, going into the Dandelion tag and reading that is like, okay, I guess. I know you didn't read until Time of Contempt, but okay, that's your opinion. Oh, that also leads me to another point, which is I think that a lot of the Netflix fandom that started reading the books maybe only read up until The Sword of Destiny, or even just The Last Wish, and did not read the entire series, which has the full character arcs. And I'm not saying that someone inherently needs to read the entire book series in order to count as a Witcher fan, but it certainly helps when participating in discussions of character arcs and who these characters are at heart, because like the story is not complete yet. So yeah, I think that the Witcher fandom gatekeeping is almost somewhat of a defense mechanism, because these spaces were kind of taken away from us at a point in time when everything from Netflix sort of flooded social media. So I think that book fans, including myself, in reaction to that, tried to carve out book-specific spaces in which we would not talk about the Netflix adaptation, or we would only talk about it in terms of like, oh, they got this wrong and I don't like this part, which I feel like, unfortunately, some Netflix fans might find as exclusionary. It was never intended to not welcome people, but rather to carve out that space for book discussion that would not be overrun by Netflix. But I also think that like fans in general are a little bit more hardy than we might give them credit for, because like as someone who came in through The Witcher 3, I had to do like a lot of unlearning of who the characters were to get to the book version of events. I was led to believe that, oh, it's a continuation. But, the more reading I did of the books, the more apparent it became to me that these are two separate canons. So I think that asking the Netflix fans to consider that the books are an entirely separate canon is actually not that large of an ask. I think that's something that every fan that gets into one media through an adaptation ultimately has to do if they want to participate in the original source material fandom. That's just how it is. And this is the last question for the video, and it is, how could Netflix best adapt the last two novels into one season of streaming TV? Not if it'll be bad, because duh, but just speculating on what's the best version of the last season they could produce. Good question. I have no fucking idea. I think that Tower of the Swallow and Lady of the Lake are two separate story arcs that need to be kept separate. But, this is the predicament we're in, so let's just imagine the best possible version, right? Well, I think that Tower of the Swallow, Ciri is the main character, really, Geralt really descends into more of the B plot there, which breaks my heart, honestly, in this case, because in the past season, in season 4 of the Netflix Witcher, they did not really set up Geralt's company in the proper way, in the way that Baptism of Fire does it. So to focus more on Ciri would mean to basically not do any of the development that Geralt's company really deserves. But if we are really trying to adapt Tower of the Swallow, then Ciri needs to be the main focus during it. One of the things that the Netflix series does in every season, which just completely shoots themselves in the foot, is trying to give equal focus to Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer in every single season, which is just not how it is in the books, which means that the adaptation becomes really unbalanced and is not going to be accurate to the books no matter what they do. So I would immediately fix that. I would just allow it to have a character focus per season, and this season being a Ciri season, because really the main arc of Tower of the Swallow is Ciri being captured by Bonhart and being pursued by him and also by the other antagonists, and then coming back and having her revenge moment on the ice. But then Lady of the Lake is also a very Ciri dominant book, so we would need to include all of the Ciri arc from that. So here's how I would maybe structure it, imagining that there's 8 episodes in a season. I think that episode 7 needs to be the Castle Stygia episode, because it's basically, well, it's the final battle, but also not really the final battle. Episode 8 can be all the falling action with chapter 11 and chapter 12. And then episode 6, maybe just devote it entirely to the Battle of Brenna and all of the politics. It seems a little bit messy to shove all of the politics into one episode, but this is the Netflix standard, okay? So for Ciri, for episode 1, I would probably have the events of chapter 4 of Tower of the Swallow, when she's with Bonhart and she's being forced to fight in Huvanganel's arena. And then in episode 2, I would have the events of chapter 10 of Tower of the Swallow, when she's escaping from Bonhart and Skellen and Riense in the village of Unicorn. And then in episode 3, I would have the iconic ice skating scene on Tarn Mira, and then the cliffhanger with her entering Tor Zariel at the end of the episode. That leads us to episode 4, where Ciri would be in the Elven world, and I think that this is the perfect time, because we're like right in the middle of the season, to talk about Ciri's Lara gene, why she's related to Lara Doran, and all of the lore surrounding her powers. And then episode 5 could be her flight from the Elven world and her world hopping and trying to get back to her world. That allows us to have episode 6 be the Battle of Brenna and episode 7 be the assault on Stygia Castle. But then we also have Geralt and Yennefer's storylines to attend to, which is kind of complicated because they really changed the characterization for these characters. But I guess one good thing, kind of, is that they are physically in the same settings, in the same locations as they were at certain points of the books. But what's really sad to me is that this means that we have to skip Yennefer's entire Skellige plotline, because at the end of the last season, she's shown right near Vilgefortz's maelstrom, right besides the whirlpool. And I think that she's probably just immediately going to be taken to Stygia Castle through the whirlpool, so that means that we are skipping the entirety of her development in Skellige. I really don't like that. I think that does such a disservice to Yennefer's character, because we have not explored, I mean, that chapter, chapter 9 of Tower of the Swallow, is essentially Yennefer's culmination of her character arc as Ciri's mother. So maybe I might just fudge the details, and maybe through the whirlpool she ends up on Skellige now, and we just do the Skellige plotline, and then she's like obsessed with getting back to this whirlpool because she thinks it means something. And then in, episode 5, she ends up in Stygia Castle and is Vilgefortz's prisoner. So I think that Yennefer would probably take a back seat in episode 1, because it would probably be most devoted to Ciri and then to Geralt. So maybe episode 1 is Yennefer on Ard Skellig and talking to Krach and Krayt, and then episode 2 is her going to Hindersfjall and having that communion with the goddess Freya. And then in episode 3, she makes her megascope with the diamond Bringisman, and she probably falls into Vilgefortz's clutches by the end of the episode. So episode 4 could be her at Stygia Castle and just sort of being Vilgefortz's prisoner. Then to Geralt and his company. Oh boy, there's a lot to go through. So I would probably put the events of chapter 3 of Tower of the Swallow in episode 1, which is just sort of like the recap, lovingly told by Dandelion. Probably I would have the events of chapter 5 in that episode 2. So then we could just really quickly introduce Angoulême and not mangle her character too much. And then maybe have the fight with Geralt and Cahir also in this episode if there's time for it. If not, move it to episode 2. In episode 2, probably have Geralt and Cahir and Angoulême going to the mines to find Shirou. and then that not really working out, and Geralt and Cahir having to buddy and develop their relationship a little bit more. Then episode 3 would have Regis finding Geralt and Cahir, Geralt going to Avallac'h, and Geralt and his company with the Druids. Then episode 4 for Geralt could be entirely devoted to Lady of the Lake chapter 3, which is when his company and him go to Beauclair, and episode 5 could have him leaving Beauclair, as in Lady of the Lake chapter 4. Then we could split up the Battle of Brenna in episode 6 with some, I don't know, moments of Geralt and his company, going through the Malheur Pass, maybe through Sudeth Valley, and then in episode 7 they would end up in Castle Styga. And then with everything else that's like connective tissue, like Visigoda and the Sorceress Nimue, have them spread out wherever it makes sense, because they're really connecting the story together. And then I think that we would conclude with episode 8, the final episode of the final season, being devoted to the aftermath of the politics of everything that happened at Brenna. So we'd probably have chapter 10 of Lady of the Lake adapted here, as well as chapters 11 and 12. And we would have Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri riding around and concluding Ciri's business. Ciri and Yennefer going to the Lodge of Sorceresses. I guess Yennefer runs the lodge now, so it's not really a really tough decision to allow them to go. They don't even need to do a vote now. Yennefer's just like, we're off. And then we would end with the Pogrom at Rivia and Geralt and Yennefer passing into legend as heroes as Ciri takes them to Avalon. And then I would just bookend the season with Ciri leaving with Galahad in the Arthurian world. Even also, I guess, to adapt it and to make this season run a little bit smoother, Ciri could be relating her story to Galahad from the beginning of the season, from episode 1, and really giving like Visigoda's role to Galahad in some way. Just because I feel like it should end with Ciri and Galahad riding away from the lake, which would be really weird because Visigoda has a very specific role of advising Ciri, but like we have to adjust some things because this is a very messy adaptation we've inherited in this speculative concept. But yeah, in general, I don't think it would really work to adapt both Tower of the Swallow and Lady of the Lake in the same season because they have very different themes and questions that they get to. Tower of the Soul is really about suffering, in my opinion. Ciri suffers at the hands of Bonhart. Geralt is suffering because his knee is freaking paining him, and he also has this giant fallout with Cahir, which is devastating for the company. And Yennefer is basically also tortured in her visions of Freya and also when she falls into the hands of Vilgefortz at Castle Styga. And then Lady of the Lake is much more about dreams and storytelling. It literally starts with the freaking Shakespeare quote about dreams, and then even more as Regis goes on in chapter 3. But Beauclair is like a city of dreams. It's a fairy tale land. Very, very dreamy fairy tale land. And then the Elven world is also like a fantasy land. Lady of the Lake is a legend. We're getting to Arthurian mythology. I think that there would be way too many themes to really execute by bringing them together into one conglomerate season. But yeah, this is the mess that they've created for themselves. So I'll be interested to see how they fix that. That's going to be it for the Q&A today. Thank you so much for watching. And for 10,000 subscribers, I'm really happy and really proud that our community has grown this much, and I hope it continues to grow. I've been Nimue, and I'll see you next time on Ace Vitre. Take care.